I still remember the sting of those words. "She's just not one of us, is she?" My father's dismissive tone, barely concealed behind a practiced smile as he patted my shoulder and moved on to my brother's proposal instead. The Windsor family business. Luxury. Home construction for 3 generations was supposedly in my blood too, but somehow my DNA was always questioned at the boardroom table. I wasn't just qualified, I was overqualified. Master's degree in architectural engineering, 3 years at a top firm in Chicago, and ideas that could have revolutionized our approach to high-end construction. But in the Windsor Empire, I was just little Grace, expected to handle the interior, design catalogs, or at best, client relations where my feminine touch might be useful. God, it was frustrating. Every Monday morning meeting felt like walking into a fortress designed to keep me out. My Uncle Frank would literally talk over me. "Now, Grace, honey, this is a bit technical," as if I hadn't spent weekends poring over building codes while my cousins were out partying. My presentations were always scheduled last, when everyone was checking their watches, eager to wrap up. The worst part? I kept trying, for years. I'd come in with meticulously prepared proposals, research-backed, innovations and cost analyses that could have saved millions. They'd nod politely, sometimes even throw me a bone. "That's cute, Grace," before proceeding with whatever my brother or male cousins had cobbled together the night before. It wasn't just the men either. My Aunt Meredith, the only other woman, in leadership, had become so entrenched in the boys' club mentality that she was often harder on me than anyone else. "Women have to be twice as tough in this business," she'd say, while simultaneously undermining my authority with the contractors. There was this one project. Gosh, I'd worked on it for months, a sustainable luxury development that would have put Windsor & Sons ahead of the curve. I'd secured preliminary interest from investors, mapped out the entire ecosystem, even found ways to maintain our signature luxury aesthetic while cutting the carbon footprint by 60%. My father flipped through my presentation binder for all of 3 minutes before sliding it back across the table. "Clients don't want to pay premium prices for tree hugger homes, sweetie." That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by blueprints and material samples, wondering if I was crazy. Was I really so wrong? Or was I just born with the wrong last name? Or rather, the right last name but the wrong gender? The family gatherings were almost worse than the office politics. Thanksgiving dinners where Uncle Rob would ask my younger, male cousin for business advice while passing me the mashed potatoes without making eye contact. Christmas parties where I'd overhear snippets. "She's just not built for this industry," or "She'll probably marry someone from the business anyway." I tried different approaches. I wore serious suits. I wore feminine dresses. I spoke authoritatively. I spoke collaboratively. Nothing worked. In their eyes, I remained the little girl who once played with dollhouses, not the architect who could design real ones. Looking back, I can see how they'd created this perfect system, an invisible cage where I was perpetually trying to prove myself while they kept moving the goalposts. The men were assertive, while I was emotional. They made bold decisions, while I was not seeing the big picture. It was maddening. One evening, after another dismissive meeting, I found myself parked outside our flagship development, a sprawling luxury estate that had put Windsor & Sons on the map 20 years earlier. I realized with a start that I'd been unconsciously redesigning it in my head, seeing all the ways it could be improved, made more efficient, more beautiful, more sustainable. That's when it hit me. I wasn't the problem. I never had been. It wasn't about winning their approval anymore. It couldn't be. I needed to stop fighting for a seat at a table that was deliberately built too high for me to reach. What I needed was to build my own damn table. I'll never forget that day. The boardroom felt smaller than usual, almost suffocating. The mahogany table gleamed under those pretentious recessed lights my father had insisted on installing. Modern but classic, he'd called them. I'd spent weeks preparing this presentation, my last attempt to convince Windsor & Sons to move into eco-sustainable luxury homes. And so, I concluded, pointing to my final slide. With these innovations, we could cut construction costs by 22%, reduce our carbon footprint by 65%, and create homes that our increasingly environmentally conscious clientele would pay a premium. 4. The market research is clear. This is where luxury housing is heading. The silence that followed should have been my first clue. Then my brother James cleared his throat. "That's a cute little project, Gracie," he said, using that childhood nickname he knew I despised. "But this is Windsor & Sons, not some hippie commune builder." A few chuckles rippled around the table. My father didn't even look up from his phone. Uncle Rob leaned forward. "Grace, sweetie, our clients want marble countertops and gold fixtures. Not," he squinted at my slides, "bamboo flooring and solar panels. Actually," I started, "the bamboo we'd be using is harder than traditional hardwood, and the solar integration is completely invisible from—" "I think we've heard enough," my father finally spoke, closing his leather portfolio. "Next item on the agenda, the Westlake project. James, what's the status?" Just like that. Dismissed. Erased. Like I hadn't spent months researching, planning, calculating. Like I wasn't even in the room. Something snapped inside me that day. I'd like to say it was a dramatic moment, that I stood up, delivered a scathing speech, and stormed out. But that's not what happened. Instead, I quietly gathered my papers, closed my laptop, and sat through the rest of the meeting in silence. Sometimes the most powerful decisions happen in whispers, not shouts. That evening, sitting in my apartment with a glass of wine, okay, maybe it was my second glass, I started sketching. Not a building, a plan, a company structure, a logo. By midnight, I had the bones of what would become Allard Designs. Why Alar? It was my grandmother's maiden name. The woman who'd secretly taught me to read blueprints when I was 8, who'd whispered, "You can build anything, Gracie," when the boys wouldn't let me play with their building blocks. Grandma Aller had passed away years ago, but that night I felt her presence urging me forward. The next morning I submitted my resignation. No dramatic exit interview, no burning bridges, just a simple email. "Please accept my resignation, effective 2 weeks from today. I appreciate the opportunities I've had at Windsor & Sons." My father called immediately. "What is this nonsense? Grace, if this is about yesterday—" "It's not about yesterday," I told him, feeling strangely calm. "It's about every day for the past 5 years. I'm going to pursue other opportunities." What opportunities? Who would hire a Windsor to compete against Windsor & Sons? I laughed. Actually laughed. "That's the thing, Dad. I'm not looking to be hired. I'm starting my own company." The silence on the other end was delicious. Then, "Don't be ridiculous. You don't have the capital or the connections." "I have my trust fund," I reminded him, my grandmother's parting gift. The one thing they couldn't touch. And as for connections, well, I guess we'll see. He actually laughed then, that condescending chuckle that had haunted my childhood. "You'll be back within 6 months, begging for your old job. This industry will eat you alive, Grace." I didn't argue. There was no point. Instead, I simply said, "Goodbye, Dad," and hung up. Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I worked diligently, transferred all my projects, acted as if this was just a normal career move. Meanwhile, at night, Allard Designs was taking shape in my apartment. Business plans, website mock-ups, initial designs for what would become our first project. On my last day, my father didn't even come to the office. My brother gave me a generic farewell card signed by the team. Most signatures were just scribbles, people who'd barely acknowledged my existence for years. As I carried my small box of personal items out of the Windsor building for the last time, I felt neither sadness nor anger. Instead, there was this strange, bubbling feeling in my chest that took me a moment to identify. Freedom. That rejection, that humiliating boardroom moment, wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something much bigger than I could have imagined. They thought they were dismissing me. In reality, they were releasing me. Let me tell you, there's nothing quite like the silence of an empty apartment to make you question your life choices. My first office was my dining table, a cheap IKEA number that wobbled whenever I typed too enthusiastically. The Windsor family crest hanging in my father's mahogany-paneled office seemed a world away as I taped my hand-drawn Aller Designs logo to the wall above my laptop. What have I done? Became my 3 a.m. mantra those first few weeks. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, calculator in hand, trying to stretch my trust fund into a viable business runway. It wasn't a small sum, but in the world of luxury real estate development, it was barely seed money. The first thing I needed was a project. Something small enough to be manageable but impressive enough to make a statement. I found it in an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the arts district. The owner was an elderly man named Morris who'd been turning down developers for years. They all want to tear it down, he told me over coffee in his cluttered kitchen. Build some soulless condos. I don't want to tear it down, I said. I want to transform it. I showed him my sketches. The warehouse converted into 3 luxury eco-homes, preserving the original brick facade and industrial character, while creating spaces that were both opulent and sustainable. Solar glass windows disguised as industrial, panes, reclaimed wood floors with state-of-the-art heating systems beneath, a shared courtyard with a living wall of native plants. Morris studied my plans for what felt like an eternity. "You're not like the others," he finally said. "No," I agreed. "I'm not." He sold me the property at a price that made sense for both of us. Not charity, Morris was too proud for that, but fair. My first win. The hard part came next. Finding contractors willing to work with an unknown firm on what they considered experimental designs. I can't tell you how many times I heard, "That's not how we do things, miss." Translation: You're not your father's company. I started small, hiring individual craftspeople rather than big crews. A carpenter who specialized in reclaimed materials, an electrician fresh out of training, eager to work with smart home technology, a landscape designer who'd been rejected by larger firms for being too green-focused. We made mistakes. Lord, did we make mistakes? The first rainwater recycling system leaked into the main bedroom. The sustainable insulation we sourced turned out to be not so sustainable after all. One particularly memorable day, I found myself knee-deep in mud after a delivery truck got stuck in the unfinished driveway during a downpour. Every setback drained my limited funds, and there were nights I'd sit surrounded by revised blueprints, calculating whether I had enough money to make payroll. I sold my designer wardrobe piece by piece on consignment, moved to a cheaper apartment, learned to survive on ramen and determination. The contractors started calling me boss lady at AUG, first with thinly veiled skepticism, later with growing respect. I was on site every day, not afraid to get my hands dirty, learning the practical side of building that my fancy degrees had never taught me. The first project took nearly twice as long as I'd projected. When we finally finished, I almost couldn't believe it. 3 stunning eco-luxury homes, each with a unique character yet harmoniously connected. Modern, but warm. Luxurious, but ethical. Everything I'd envisioned when I'd been laughed out of that Windsor & Sons boardroom. The homes sold within 2 weeks, all above asking price. The buyers weren't just wealthy, they were influential. A tech CEO, a renowned surgeon, a popular lifestyle blogger who featured her new home in a viral post. People who cared about both luxury and legacy. That first success gave me just enough capital and credibility to secure a small business loan for the next project. This time, I aimed higher. A 6-unit development on a challenging hillside lot that other developers had deemed too difficult. With each project, the Aller name began to circulate in the right circles. Have you seen what they're doing with those smart home features? Did you hear about their zero carbon footprint guarantee? Apparently, they're booked solid for the next year. I reinvested every penny of profit, expanding cautiously but steadily. Hired a small but dedicated team who believed in what we were building. Not just homes, but a new approach to luxury living. Each success became the foundation for the next one. There were still plenty of no's, plenty of doors closed in my face, plenty of, we prefer to work with established firms. But increasingly, there were yeses, there were opportunities, there was growth. 3 years in, standing on the roof deck of our most ambitious project yet, a fully sustainable luxury apartment building with views of the city skyline, I allowed myself a moment of pride. From a wobbling IKEA table to this. From rejected to respected. I wasn't Windsor's daughter anymore. I was Grace Aller, founder and CEO of the most innovative eco-luxury development firm in the city. And I was just getting started. It's funny how things shift without you noticing at first. Like watching a plant grow, you don't see the daily changes. But suddenly you look up and realize that tiny seedling has become a sturdy young tree. That's how it felt the first time Aller Designs went head-to-head with Windsor & Sons on a major contract. The Riverview project was exactly the kind of development my father would have salivated over. Prime waterfront property, deep-pocketed, investors, and the potential for the kind of splashy publicity that Windsor & Sons typically dominated. When I submitted our bid, I wasn't expecting to win. It was more of a statement. We're here. We're players. Notice us. My team and I had worked nights and weekends perfecting our proposal. Not just standard luxury features, but innovations that would make the buildings practically self-sufficient while maintaining the opulence their wealthy future residents would expect. Solar glass that looked like normal windows but generated power. Gray water systems disguised as decorative water features. Smart home technology that anticipated needs before residents even realized they had them. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was on site at another project, hard hat on, boots muddy, when my phone rang. Ms. Aller, this is Margaret Chen from Horizon Investments. I'm calling about the Riverview proposal. I stepped away from the noise of construction, heart pounding. Yes, of course. Thank you for getting back to me. We've reviewed all submissions, and I'm pleased to inform you that Aller Designs has been selected as the developer for the Riverview project. I actually had to sit down on a stack of lumber. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? She laughed lightly. You beat out some very established firms, Ms. Aller, including Windsor & Sons, who were frankly the favorites going in. But your approach to luxury sustainability was exactly what we've been looking for. The board was unanimous. After the call, I sat there for a long moment, letting it sink in. We'd just outbid Windsor & Sons, my father's company, the regional powerhouse, the unbeatable family legacy, on what would be the most prestigious development project of the year. The news spread quickly through the industry. My phone blew up with congratulatory messages from colleagues and curious inquiries from potential clients who'd previously considered us too small or too unconventional. What they didn't know, what I was only beginning to understand myself, was how strategically we'd positioned ourselves. While Windsor & Sons had been focused on courting the same old money clients, Aller had been building relationships with the new generation of wealthy innovators, tech entrepreneurs, sustainable investment funds, forward-thinking corporations looking to house their executives. Our team, too, had become our secret weapon. While my father's company hired from the same pool of prestigious schools and old boy networks, I'd been scooping up talented architects, engineers, and project managers who'd been overlooked by the old guard. Women returning to the workforce after having children. Brilliant immigrants whose foreign credentials weren't recognized. Young visionaries considered too radical by conservative firms. Carlos, our head of sustainability, had been rejected by 3 major developers before joining us. Now his innovations were featured in architectural magazines. Zoe, our chief architect, had been told her designs were too feminine by a Windsor project manager. Now those same designs were winning awards and attracting premium clients. Riverview victory opened floodgates. Suddenly, we were being invited to bid on projects that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Our reputation for beautiful, sustainable luxury was spreading beyond the city to the national stage. And then came the moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating, running into my brother James at an industry event. I'd spotted him across the room, looking exactly as he always had. Expensive suit, perfect haircut, that air of entitled confidence. He saw me too. I watched the expressions cross his face. Surprise, dismissal, then slowly, as he took in the group of influential developers I was chatting with, something that looked almost like worry. When he approached me later, his handshake was firmer than necessary. "Heard about Riverview," he said, forcing a smile. "Beginner's luck?" I smiled back, genuine this time. "I don't believe in luck, James. Just vision and hard work. Dad thinks you're making a mistake with all this green building nonsense." "And how's business at Windsor & Sons these days?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Our industry wasn't that big, and rumors traveled fast. He shifted uncomfortably. "We're focusing on quality over quantity this quarter." Translation: they were losing bids. "Well, if Windsor & Sons ever wants to collaborate on a project," I said, handing him my card, "Aller Designs is always open to conversations." The look on his face, half outrage, half disbelief, was worth every sleepless night, every penny of my depleted trust fund, every moment of doubt I'd endured. As I walked away, I heard someone ask James, "Isn't that Grace Windsor?" "No," he replied, his voice tight. "That's Grace Aller." That was the moment I knew everything had changed. We weren't just competing with Windsor & Sons anymore. In the areas that mattered, innovation, sustainability, the future of luxury, development, we were winning. And the empire my father had built, the one that had never had room for me, it was starting to crumble. The beauty of anonymity is that you can be everywhere and nowhere at once. For nearly 4 years, the connection between Grace Windsor and Aller Designs remained my best-kept secret. My family knew I'd started my own company, of course, but they assumed it was some cute little boutique operation, a hobby business to keep me occupied until I came to my senses. Little did they know that the mysterious competitor gradually eating away at their market share was the very person they'd dismissed so easily. I'd changed my professional name to Grace Aller, citing my grandmother's maiden name as a tribute. New clients rarely made the connection to the Windsor Empire, and those who did usually kept it to themselves. I'd cultivated a different image, less old money polish, more innovative edge. Traded pearls for architectural glasses, conservative. Suits for creative professional wear, small changes that helped me slide under the radar. The real game changer was when Windsor & Sons lost the Lakefront Commons project to us, a development they'd been practically counting as theirs before the contracts were even drawn up. The Windsors had built 3 previous phases of the luxury community, and Phase 4 was supposed to be a slam dunk. But times were changing. The developer wanted something fresh, something sustainable yet opulent, something exactly like what Aller Designs had been pioneering. I wasn't in the room when my father learned they'd lost the bid, but through the industry grapevine, I heard he'd actually thrown a crystal paperweight against the wall. "Who the hell is Aller Designs?" he demanded. No one connected the dots. Not yet. Meanwhile, whispers were spreading through Windsor & Sons. I still had friends there, people who'd been kind to me even when the family hadn't. They'd text me updates that both amused and concerned me. "Your dad's on the warpath about some company called Aller." If only he knew. Or James is freaking out because they lost the Henderson contract to some upstart with fancy green gimmicks. His words, not mine. The gossip wasn't just about lost contracts. There were rumors of infighting, blame-shifting, declining morale. My brother and my cousin Tyler had apparently gotten into a shouting match in the middle of the office over whose fault it was that clients were jumping ship. My Uncle Rob was pushing for aggressive price cutting to win back market share, while my father insisted on maintaining their premium pricing structure. "The Windsor name means something," he reportedly told the board. "We won't devalue it by chasing trends," but the trends were becoming the new standard, and Allard Designs was leading the charge. Each quarter, we grew more visible, more respected. Industry publications began featuring our projects. Potential clients started coming to us rather than the other way around. I hired a PR specialist, a brilliant woman named Tasha who'd been passed over for promotion at a major firm because she was too aggressive. Together, we crafted a public image for Allard that emphasized innovation and discretion. We never directly targeted Windsor & Sons in our marketing, never mentioned them at all. We simply positioned ourselves as the future, while implicitly framing them as the past. The strategy was working almost too well. By our 5th year, Allard Designs had siphoned away not just clients, but talent from Windsor & Sons. 3 of their top project managers had joined us, along with their most promising young architect. I knew things were getting dire when I received a text from my cousin Tyler's wife at a family wedding I'd politely declined to attend. "Your dad got drunk and spent 20 minutes ranting about that Allard woman ruining the business. If only he knew it was you. How are you pulling this off?" The truth was, I wasn't trying to destroy Windsor & Sons. I was building Allard Designs. There's a difference. My success wasn't about revenge. It was about vision. About creating something that should have existed all along. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a certain satisfaction watching my family scramble to catch up to innovations I'd proposed years earlier. Now they were hastily adding eco-friendly features to their developments, throwing around terms like sustainability and carbon neutrality in their marketing materials without fully understanding what those commitments entailed. Too little, too late. The market had shifted, and they were behind the curve, chasing us rather than leading the industry as they'd done for generations. The most telling moment came when I overheard 2 Windsor & Sons executives at an industry conference, not realizing who I was as I stood nearby checking my phone. "We need to figure out what Allard's secret is," one said. "Maybe try to poach some of their team?" The other laughed bitterly. "Good luck with that. I've never seen employee loyalty like theirs. Something about the culture. People don't want to leave." "What about this Grace Allard woman? Anyone know?" "Anything about her? Not much. Keeps a low profile. Rumor is she turned down an acquisition offer from Brighton Development that would have made her a fortune. Apparently said the company wasn't for sale at any price." I smiled to myself. Some things were worth more than money, a lesson my family had never quite understood. As I walked away, I thought about how strange it was to be the ghost haunting my family's empire, the invisible hand guiding their slow but steady decline. They were looking everywhere for answers, except in the mirror. The day would come when they'd discover the truth. I wasn't dreading it anymore. I was ready. The first tangible sign that Windsor & Sons was truly in trouble came, ironically, during what should have been a celebration. The company's 75th anniversary gala, a lavish affair at the Metropolitan Hotel, with city officials, business leaders, and clients all in attendance. I'd received an invitation, of course. My father may have written me off professionally, but appearances still mattered in his world. I almost didn't go. What was the point? To stand awkwardly by the bar while relatives made passive-aggressive comments about my little business venture? But Tasha, my PR guru, saw it differently. "You have to attend," she insisted. "Not as a Windsor, but as the CEO of Allard Designs. You've earned your place at that table." So I went, wearing a green dress that matched the Allard logo colors, a small act of defiance in a sea of Windsor blue. The reaction when I walked in was subtle but unmistakable. Conversations paused. Glances were exchanged. Someone whispered, "I didn't think she'd show." My father greeted me stiffly, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Grace, glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, matching his tone. Congratulations on 75 years. What I didn't say was what everyone in the industry already knew. Windsor & Sons was hemorrhaging clients and capital. The whispers had become headlines in trade publications. Windsor projects facing delays. Major client drops Windsor for competitor. Windsor & Sons announces layoffs amid restructuring. The layoffs had been particularly brutal. 30% of their workforce cut in one fell swoop. My cousin Tyler had been unceremoniously demoted from project director to sales. A humiliating step down that had supposedly led to a shouting match in my father's office so loud that the receptionist had considered calling security. As I circulated through the gala, accepting congratulations on Aller's recent successes, I noticed something alarming. Many of the faces that should have been there weren't. Key clients, important contractors, the mayor, who'd never missed a Windsor event before. Their absence spoke volumes. Windsor & Sons was no longer the power player it once was. The final blow came during my father's speech. He was halfway through his usual self-congratulatory remarks when he was handed a note. His face changed, hardened, then paled. He stumbled over his next few words before regaining composure and hastily concluding. Later that evening, the news broke. Westfield Properties, Windsor & Sons' largest and oldest client, had just announced they were filing a lawsuit against the company for breach of contract, citing persistent delays, quality control issues, and failure to meet sustainability benchmarks. The lawsuit was devastating enough. The timing, during the anniversary celebration, was salt in the wound, a deliberate message that the old guard was falling. I felt no joy at the news. These were people's livelihoods at stake. People who had nothing to do with how I'd been treated. The craftsmen, the office staff, the laborers who just wanted to do good work and support their families. Over the next few months, the Windsor Empire continued its slow-motion collapse. 2 more major projects were canceled. Their stock price, yes, they'd gone public a decade earlier, another one of my father's grand plans, dropped to an all-time low. Industry analysts began using terms like outdated business model and failure to innovate. Meanwhile, Aller Designs received the Sustainable Building Council's highest honor, the Green Visionary Award, for our revolutionary approach to luxury eco-development. The irony wasn't lost on anyone when the ceremony was held in a hotel previously developed by Windsor & Sons. Accepting the award in front of national media, I spoke about the future of sustainable luxury, about responsibility to future generations, about the perfect harmony between opulence and environmental stewardship, all the things I'd tried to tell my family years earlier. The standing ovation was overwhelming, not just applause, but vindication. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from James. Congratulations. Dad watched the ceremony on live stream. He wouldn't admit it, but I think he's impressed. Too little, too late, I thought. But I replied with a simple, thank you. A week later, an even more unexpected message arrived, an email from my father's assistant requesting a meeting. No details, just a proposed date and time. After some deliberation, I agreed. I expected the meeting to be at the Windsor Building, that imposing glass and steel monument to my family's legacy. Instead, my father suggested a small cafe halfway between our offices. When I arrived, he was already there, looking older than I remembered. The confident, larger-than-life figure of my childhood seemed diminished somehow. Grace, he said, standing to greet me. No hug, just a firm handshake. Business, not family. Dad, I replied, sitting across from him. What can I do for you? He took a deep breath. Windsor & Sons is in trouble. I've heard the rumors. More than rumors. We're facing bankruptcy if the Westfield lawsuit goes through. The board is considering a restructuring, possibly selling off divisions. I waited, suspecting where this was heading. Your company has been successful, he continued, each word seeming to cost him effort. Your approaches to sustainability, your innovations, they're what the market wants now. I nodded, still waiting. I'm proposing a merger. Windsor and Sons and Aller Designs. Combined resources, combined expertise. And there it was. The mighty Windsor Empire, reduced to seeking salvation from the daughter they'd dismissed. The irony was almost too perfect. A merger, I repeated carefully. Or an acquisition. His jaw tightened. A partnership. And who would lead this partnership? The question hung between us. In his world, the answer was obvious. He would. The Windsor name would take precedence. I would be absorbed back into the fold, my innovations claimed as their own. We can discuss the details, he hedged. I smiled, not unkindly. I think we both know Aller Designs isn't for sale, not even to Windsor and Sons. His face fell, then hardened. Pride is a luxury, Grace. There are 300 employees at Windsor depending on the company's survival. And they're welcome to apply at Aller, I replied. We're expanding. We need good people. He stared at me, finally seeing what I'd become. Not his rebellious daughter, but a competitor who had outplayed him at his own game. Is this revenge? He asked quietly. I considered the question seriously. No, I finally said. It's evolution. As I stood to leave, I felt no triumph, no vindication. Only the certainty that I had built something that would last, something truly mine, while the empire that had rejected me crumbled under the weight of its own inflexibility. The Forbes profile wasn't my idea. In fact, I'd turned down their initial requests for interviews, preferring to let our work speak for itself. But when they persisted, framing it as a feature on the future of sustainable luxury development, I reluctantly agreed. I should have known they'd dig deeper. Journalists worth their salt always do. The reporter, Anita Cheng, was thorough. She interviewed our team, toured our developments, and asked insightful questions about our approach to eco-luxury. Everything was going well until our third meeting, over coffee at my favorite cafe. So, Grace, she said casually, setting down her cup, when were you planning to mention that you're Grace Windsor? My stomach dropped. I go by Aller professionally. Your grandmother's maiden name? She nodded. I did my research. You're the daughter of Robert Windsor, CEO of Windsor and Sons, the company that, coincidentally, has been losing market share to Aller Designs for the past several years. There was no point denying it. That information isn't relevant to what we're building at Aller. Isn't it, though? Her eyes sparkled with the thrill of a good story. The overlooked daughter who left the family business and built a competing company that's now outperforming them? That's not just relevant. It's the headline. That's not the story I want to tell, I insisted. Why not? It's inspiring. It's powerful. I sighed, knowing I was fighting a losing battle. My work at Aller stands on its own merits. I don't want it reduced to a family drama. But the story was too good to ignore. When the article came out, the Windsor Who Walked Away, how Grace Aller built an empire that eclipsed her family legacy, it sent shockwaves through the industry. The secret was out. My phone exploded with messages. Old colleagues, industry contacts, family members I hadn't spoken to in years. The most surprising was from my brother James. Always knew you were the smartest one in the family. We should talk. I didn't respond to any of them. Not yet. The article was everywhere. Local news picked it up. Then national business programs. A women's leadership podcast reached out for an interview. A sustainable business conference asked me to deliver the keynote address. Overnight, I had become a symbol of female entrepreneurship, of sustainable innovation, of standing up to entrenched patriarchal business structures. The narrative was powerful, but it wasn't the whole truth. It wasn't just about being a woman in a man's world or about sustainability versus tradition. It was about vision, seeing possibilities where others saw only the way things had always been done. The revelation changed things at ROLLS-ROYCE too. Suddenly my team was looking at me differently, with new respect certainly, but also with questions in their eyes. Had I built this company just to prove something to my family? Was it all about revenge? I called an all-hands meeting to address the elephant in the room. By now, you've probably all seen the Forbes article, I began, facing the gathered employees. Yes, I was born Grace Windsor. Yes, I worked at Windsor & Sons before founding ROLLS-ROYCE. But that's not why we're here today. It's not why we've built what we've built. I looked around at their faces, the talented architects, engineers, craftspeople, and visionaries who'd joined me on this journey. ROLLS-ROYCE Designs was never about competing with Windsor & Sons. It was about creating something that needed to exist in the world. Something better. Something forward-thinking. You didn't join this company because of my last name. Most of you didn't even know it. You joined because you believed in our mission. The tension in the room visibly eased. Nods of agreement. A few smiles. Nothing about our work changes because of this article. We keep building. We keep innovating. We keep leading. The only difference is that now I don't have to dodge questions about my background at industry events. That got a laugh, breaking the last of the tension. The media frenzy continued for weeks. Every business publication wanted an exclusive. Every industry conference suddenly had an opening for a keynote speaker. I accepted a few strategic opportunities and declined the rest, always steering conversations toward ROLLS-ROYCE innovations rather than Windsor family drama. But the most surreal moment came when a major business network ran a special report. The fall of Windsor & Sons. There I was, watching from my living room as financial analysts dissected my father's company's decline, pointing to failure to innovate and resistance to sustainability trends as key factors. And then, the twist that made my heart stop. Sources. Close to the company report that Windsor & Sons is considering filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection following the loss of several major contracts and mounting legal troubles. I hadn't wanted this. Competition, yes. Success for ROLLS-ROYCE, absolutely, but not destruction. That night I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my father directly. To my surprise, he answered. Grace. His voice sounded tired, defeated. Is it true? About the bankruptcy? A long pause. The board is considering all options. Dad, this isn't your fault, he interrupted, surprising me. Well, not entirely. I made mistakes, refused to see where the industry was heading. By the time we tried to adapt, we were too far behind. Coming from my father, this was as close to an admission of error as I'd ever heard. The lawsuit? I asked. We're negotiating a settlement. It'll be costly, but less damaging than a public court battle. Another pause. Then, I saw your speech at the Sustainability Summit. Your mother would have been proud. The mention of my mother, gone 15 years now, caught me off guard. She had been the artistic one, the one who'd encouraged my early interest in design, the one who'd whispered, "Follow your own star," when my father pushed too hard. Thanks, Dad, was all I could manage. After we hung up, I sat for a long time thinking about legacies, what we inherit, what we build, what we leave behind. Windsor & Sons had been my birthright, but ROLLS-ROYCE Designs was my creation. One was crumbling while the other soared. The media narrative painted me as a conquering hero, the underdog who'd vanquished the patriarchy. But I felt no victory in watching something my grandfather and great-grandfather had built slowly disintegrate. Success wasn't about destroying the old. It was about building the new. In the weeks that followed, I became a reluctant icon. Young, women in architecture and construction reached out to share how my story had inspired them. Sustainable building initiatives cited ROLLS-ROYCE work as a model. A business school used our company as a case study. The most meaningful moment came after a panel discussion where I'd spoken about the future of sustainable luxury. A young woman approached me, architectural portfolio clutched nervously in her hands. "Your story changed everything for me," she said. "My father runs a traditional construction company, and he's been fighting every idea I bring to the table. After I showed him the Forbes article about you, he actually started listening. That was the power of visibility, not fame for its own sake, but the ripple effect of one person standing their ground and succeeding against the odds." As Aller Designs continued to thrive, the questions about Windsor and Sons gradually faded. We were no longer defined in relation to them. We had become the standard against which others were measured. The revelation of my identity hadn't diminished what we'd built. If anything, it had amplified our message. The future of luxury wasn't just about opulence. It was about responsibility. Not just comfort, but conscience. And for the first time since I'd walked away from the Windsor building with that small box of personal items, I felt completely free of its shadow. I wasn't defined by what I'd left behind, but by what I'd created. I was no longer the Windsor who walked away. I was simply Grace Aller, building a better world, one sustainable luxury home at a time. Family reunions at the Windsor estate had always been elaborate affairs, less about genuine connection, and more about displaying prosperity and reinforcing hierarchies. I'd skipped the last 5 years of them, sending polite regrets that fooled no one. But this year was different. This year, I RSVP'd yes. The invitation had arrived as they always did. Heavy cream cardstock with embossed Windsor, blue lettering. "The Windsor Family Annual Gathering," it proclaimed, as if we were royalty rather than just a wealthy family with too many issues to count. But what caught my eye was the personal note in my father's handwriting at the bottom. It would mean a lot if you came, Grace. After everything, the Forbes article, the industry upheaval, Windsor and Sons' very public struggles, this small gesture felt significant. I debated for days what to wear. Nothing too flashy or aggressive. The power suit was out, but nothing that suggested I was trying to blend back in or seeking approval, so no Windsor blue. I settled on a simple emerald dress, Aller's signature color, but subtle enough not to seem like I was making a statement. As my car crunched up the familiar gravel driveway of the estate where I'd grown up, I felt a strange mix of emotions: nostalgia, anxiety, and something else I couldn't quite name. Closure, perhaps? The house looked the same. Imposing stone facade, perfectly manicured gardens, that sense of permanent solidity that had always defined the Windsors. But things had changed. The staff was smaller. The fountain in the center of the circular drive, once a showpiece, was noticeably not running. Small signs of belt tightening that would be invisible to most guests, but spoke volumes to someone who knew what to look for. My Aunt Meredith spotted me first as I entered the grand foyer, her eyebrows shooting up in genuine surprise despite my RSVP. "Grace, you actually came." She air-kissed my cheeks, her perfume exactly the same as it had been all my life. "You look successful." "Thank you, Aunt Meredith. So do you." A polite lie. She looked strained, the Windsor Empire's troubles etched into the new lines around her eyes. The great room was filled with familiar faces, cousins, uncles, family friends who'd known me since childhood. The conversations dipped as I entered, then resumed with slightly heightened energy, the unmistakable buzz of gossip. I made my way through the crowd, accepting awkward greetings and fielding predictable questions with practiced ease. "So you're some kind of eco-builder now?" Aller Designs focuses on sustainable luxury development, yes. "Heard you won the Harrington project." "We did. It's going to be our most innovative project yet." No one mentioned the obvious, that the Harrington project had previously been Windsor and Sons territory for 3 generations. No one needed to. My brother James found me by the refreshment table, looking older than his 38 years. The pressures of trying to save a sinking ship had taken their toll. "Wasn't sure you'd show," he said, clinking his glass against mine. Wasn't sure I'd be welcome. He laughed, a genuine laugh, surprising us both. You know what's funny? Dad talks about you all the time now. Grace's company this, Grace's innovations that. He has a scrapbook of articles about you. I nearly choked on my drink. You're kidding. Dead serious. It's like he's finally proud of you, now that you're his biggest competitor. Former competitor, I corrected gently. We both knew Windsor & Sons was a shadow of its former self, focusing now on smaller renovations rather than major developments. James nodded, accepting the reality without comment. Then, he's in his study. Wanted to see you when you arrived. My father's study had been the inner sanctum of the Windsor Empire, the place where deals were made, decisions handed down, the family legacy protected at all costs. As children, we'd needed special permission to enter. Even as adults, there was always that momentary hesitation before knocking. I found him standing by the window, looking out over the property. He'd lost weight, and his once dark hair was now fully silver. When he turned at my knock, I was struck by how much smaller he seemed, not just physically, but in presence. The mythic figure of my childhood reduced to human scale. Grace, he said, his voice warm with genuine pleasure. You came. I did. An awkward moment as we navigated whether to hug or shake hands. We settled on a brief, stiff embrace that nonetheless felt like progress. Drink? He offered, moving to the sidebar where crystal decanters gleamed in the late afternoon sun. Just water, thanks. He poured himself a scotch. Neat. Congratulations on the Harrington project. That's quite a coup. Thank you. He gestured to the leather chairs by the fireplace, the setting for so many lectures and disappointments over the years. This time, though, we sat as equals. I've been following your work, he said, surprising me with his directness. The lakeside, development, the urban renewal project downtown, the awards. I nodded, unsure where this was heading. You're doing what I should have done years ago, he continued. What you tried to tell us to do. The admission hung in the air between us, remarkable in its simplicity and years too late. It wouldn't have been the same at Windsor & Sons, I said finally. I needed to build something of my own. He nodded slowly. Your grandfather, my father, was the same way. Couldn't work for anyone else. Had to create his own path. A small smile. You're more Windsor than any of us gave you credit for. I go by Aller now, I reminded him gently. Professionally, yes. But you'll always be a Windsor too. That determination. That vision. He took a sip of his scotch. Your grandmother would be proud. She always said you'd surprise us all someday. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of years of misunderstanding and missed opportunities between us. Not gone, but acknowledged. Not erased, but perhaps finally faced. I didn't come here to gloat, I said suddenly, needing him to understand. This wasn't about revenge. I know that now. His eyes met mine directly. It was about building something better. Something we were too stubborn, too stuck in our ways to see. Another silence, more comfortable this time. Windsor & Sons is reorganizing, he said eventually. Smaller scale, more focused. James is taking over as CEO next month. That's good. He'll do well. I meant it. My brother had a good mind when he wasn't trying to be our father's carbon copy. We're finally implementing some of those sustainability measures you proposed years ago. A rueful smile. Better late than never, I suppose. As we talked, really talked perhaps for the first time, about business and family and the future, I realized something important. I no longer needed his approval. I'd spent so many years hungry for it, then angry at its absence, and finally determined to prove I never needed it in the first place. But the truth was, both simpler and more complex. His approval or disapproval had ceased to define me. When we rejoined the family gathering, something had shifted. Not dramatically. The Windsors would never be the type for public reconciliations or emotional scenes, but perceptibly. My father introduced me to a business associate not as my daughter Grace, but as Grace Aller, founder of Aller Designs, and yes, also my daughter. The distinction was subtle but significant. My identity was no longer subordinate to my relationship, to him. I had defined myself. Later, as dessert was being served in the dining room, my cousin Tyler's teenage daughter approached me shyly. "Is it true you started your own company because nobody would listen to your ideas?" I considered her question carefully, aware of the family members pretending not to eavesdrop. "I started my own company because I had a vision for something that didn't exist yet," I told her. "Sometimes the only way to bring new ideas into the world is to create the space for them yourself." She nodded solemnly. "I want to be an architect too. But Uncle James says it's not really a field for girls." From across the table, I caught James's eye, his expression a mix of embarrassment and defiance. The old Windsor ways died hard. "Why don't you come tour our office sometime?" I suggested. "Our head architect, Zoe, would love to show you around. She just won the Pritzker Prize for Sustainable Design." The girl's eyes widened. "Really? Could I?" "Absolutely. We're always looking for the next generation of innovators." As I drove away from the estate that evening, I realized I felt lighter somehow. Not because anything had been solved or healed. Decades of family dynamics couldn't be resolved in one afternoon, but because I'd finally understood something essential. I hadn't built Aller Designs to destroy Windsor and Sons or to prove my father wrong. I'd built it because it needed to exist, because the future needed it. I wasn't the pathetic little girl they'd dismissed, nor was I the conquering hero of the Forbes narrative. I was simply a builder, creating spaces where people could live in harmony with the world around them, creating a company where talent was recognized regardless of gender or background, creating a future where luxury and responsibility weren't opposing forces. The Windsor legacy would always be part of me, in my determination, my eye for quality, my unwillingness to compromise on excellence. But the Aller vision was mine alone. Not a rejection of the past, but an evolution. Not revenge, but renewal. As the Windsor estate disappeared in my rearview mirror, I smiled to myself. For the first time, I was driving away not in anger or pain, but in peace, the architect of my own destiny, the builder of my own legacy.